practitioners in the field. That is our entire mission. In that way, we're maybe a little bit kind of the anti-college, where in college you're learning a lot of great foundational information and theory. We're really all about showing people what careers are like in practice. What is the reality of working in the field that you're in? How do people get into certain careers and actually succeed in those careers as they go from no experience to tons of experience like Carlotta has here. All this information is kind of difficult to find, and the best way to learn it is from the people that are currently doing it. So all of you that are here in this room, think of this as a networking opportunity with us and with Carlotta, because you're going to be learning a lot during this session. And so we're very excited to have you here. If you can navigate, Vadim, to the next slide here on the screen. We're working off of one screen here, so just to take a second here. But a little bit more about School16 while Vadim pulls the slides up here. We not only host events like this, but we also have actual classes that we teach. So we have a technology career acceleration program. Right now, this is a 2-month part-time program. Most of our students that participate are either full-time in school, in college, or they are full-time working at different companies, and they're interested in learning about a lot of different types of roles in tech. Specifically, what we focus on here at School16 is non-technical roles. So that's why we have Carlotta here. She has a ton of different experience across marketing, and you'll learn throughout this conversation that marketing can mean a whole ton of different things. And also Carlotta has experiences across the board of what marketing means as well. But yeah, so this is, Vadim just had the slide before that showed our program here. I'm going to mention a little bit more about that in a second. This is what the agenda is here today. I'm going to stop talking in about 1 minute here. We're just introducing School16 and the program. We're going to have a discussion with Carlotta about different career paths in marketing and how she got into it and developed as a professional, what she looks for when she hires people on her team as well, right? To hear directly from the source. And then we're also going to have a Q&A. So you can use the chat at any time throughout this conversation, because we monitor it closely and we will ask pretty much as many questions as we can. We typically get through all of them. Just make sure it's relevant to what we're talking about here and relevant to Carlotta's experience and something that's going to be helpful to everyone else that's listening here today. That being said, there's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question. I love asking dumb questions because that makes me smarter when I get the answer. So odds are, if you ask the question, somebody else in the group probably has a similar one they're thinking about. They're too shy to put it in there. So please do. We'd love to hear from you. And we want to make sure this is a valuable session for you, not just for us. We also learn a ton in these, but this is for you.
And for people that are specifically interested in working with large brands, we're definitely going to focus a good chunk of the conversation on that as well, because that's how effectively Carlotta's career evolved. So we're excited to hear about the day-to-day of that work and what it entails and the skills required to be successful in those types of roles.
But a lot of folks want to go deeper and learn directly from the source and build relationships with people that are in these roles. So we have instructors from across the board, not just marketing, but also sales, operations, and product. Really all the core non-technical areas that you can get jobs in and succeed as a leader in tech. We love to teach those sessions. So this is a 2-month program here that we're right now in the middle of a recruiting session for. The program is going to be starting in about a month and a half here, but the deadline is coming up, and this is a selective program. We don't just accept anyone, but we really look for people that are the right candidates. So we encourage people to apply today if you are interested. It's a part-time program, so if you're still in school, or if you have a full-time job, you should be able to participate. And it's a really great way to build relationships with employers, to learn directly from people that are executing and leading these teams, and pick up some of the skills that you would need to be successful in them. So that's just school16.co/program. And Kristen just dropped it in the chat as well if you are interested.
And by the way, Kristen, thank you for joining us. Kristen's on our team here at School16. So if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to direct them at Kristen in case we don't catch them. Lastly, we're going to drop this link into the chat as well. If you can provide your feedback on today's session, we do read all of those responses carefully, but also we want to send you the recording of this event. That's just school16.co/survey. And if you want to hear about future events, you probably will, because you're going to be in our email list, but also you can follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. That's School16Co on Instagram. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we can see Carlotta. Carlotta, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to hear about your experience. Right now, your focus is brand partnerships at Oracle, but I know that you started off your career doing marketing for Silicon Valley startups. So if we can rewind all the way to the beginning, you graduated college, you started looking for opportunities in school. If you could just walk us through kind of maybe an abridged story of your career, and that'll be the jumping off point for our conversation today.
Definitely. And thank you so much for having me. By the way, I'm so happy to be here today. I love what you're doing, and hopefully it's going to be an inspiring session for everybody listening. So yes, I started my career in Silicon Valley, I would say, but I was still a student, right? So maybe we're going to rewind a little bit more. I'm originally from Italy. You can maybe tell from your name. I moved to Scotland to get started with my bachelor degree. And as part of my degree, which was 4 years, a honor degree in communications, advertising, and public relations, I had the opportunity to apply and study somewhere else for a year. And my first choice was Silicon Valley, because I was all about that tech world. And I got a place at San Jose State University. So that's where I lived for about a year and a half when I first moved to Silicon Valley. And the moment I landed, I literally was like, okay, I need to find an experience with a startup here, because I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm not going to go back home until I've got some of that in my bag, because it has to happen. So I worked, like I studied for a full year. And then towards the end of that year, for the summer, I was so determined to find something to stay a bit longer and get that experience in. And that's when I worked for a startup at the time, which was called Sense Sciences Corporation. And that was my very first experience in the world of tech. And it was an incredible experience, obviously, because it was very much my very first work experience. And it was in Silicon Valley, and I was surrounded by entrepreneurs and so many ideas, innovation everywhere. And that's really how I got started on that side of things. Then I moved back to Scotland to finish my degree. Then I moved to Sweden. I got my master's degree / MBA. It's a degree in economics and business with focus on international marketing and brand management. And then after that, I moved to London. London was always my ultimate objective. And I moved to London to start working in global media agencies. So I went from like a startup environment to a much bigger environment where the marketing element was very much focused on the media side of things. So that's when I started to work with clients. I worked in media agencies for about 3 years, something like that. And then eventually I moved on to the tech side of things at Oracle. Oracle is huge. As you know, Oracle has a massive variety of products. I sit in the ad tech space, which means we have products and solutions that brands, agencies, and publishers and platforms that basically work in the ecosystem of advertising digitally, they can use. And that's how I got to the client servicing brand partnership side of things in ad tech.
And I definitely want to uncover what that actually means. But before we do that, I'm curious, you got to Silicon Valley and it sounds like you didn't really know anybody. So how did you get that first startup job? What did you do to get it?
Yeah, so that was a lot of networking. And it was a lot of surrounding myself with people who believed in me. So obviously my first contacts were professors at the time. I was really putting in the hours, the work to try and stand out. And professors noticed that. And they really helped me network my way through with professionals. And then once I started meeting professionals, I met amazing people who really took me under their wing, and they started introducing me to many more professionals. So on top of my main startup experience at the time, I also had so many other little projects that I did because my initial CEO introduced me to all the network in San Jose. And that was amazing because it really believed in me, and that led to meeting a lot more people. I learned how to network thanks to him, thanks to some of the mentors I met within the company. A lady who was in the board of directors, we're still in touch. she was such an amazing mentor to me, and she really taught me I wouldn't really call it the art of networking, but like how really to connect with people. And that was absolutely key to start developing a network and learning how to get opportunities, really. And networking really starts from like offering help. It's not really asking for help, right? Like it's trying to understand, can I help you with something? Is there anything that I can give you so then I can learn from you as well? And there's that good value exchange that builds trust and allows you to start building strong relationships all over.
That's a really good point, Carlotta. And, there's a reason why we, for example, have these sessions. There's a reason why we talk about networking and embed it into our curriculum, whether that's at School16 or at NYU, the classes that we teach, because that is fundamental to everything that you do. Whether you're going to be managing a team or hiring a team, whether you're going to be whether you're trying to solve problems internally within a large organization like Oracle and you're networking internally, right? At the end of the day, it takes other humans to get things done. And even though it might sound soft and fluffy, it's actually critical to develop that skill of, like you said, connecting with people, driving value to them so that they're likely to drive value to you, and kind of round and round you go. So definitely don't want to gloss over that. But I do want to learn a little bit more about the skills that you picked up on the job when you were working with these Silicon Valley startups. And I guess maybe to make it a little bit more specific, I'm curious, what do you think contributed most to the work that you did and the skills that you developed that then prepared you for, continuing kind of a successful trajectory in getting better and better opportunities and eventually landing in Oracle? What kind of skills did you develop on those jobs, and what did you do day to day?
I would say there was a variety of things I learned and then I used afterwards for my career. So first thing, I don't even know if it's a skill, but it's about figuring things out. And just, if there's something you don't know how to do, it doesn't mean that you can't learn it. And I think there's a famous quote from, I can't even remember who it is from now, but it basically says, say that you can do it and then figure it out. Okay, get in there, start doing things. And even if it's a bit scrappy at the beginning, action is better than nothing. So I think with startups, those experiences, because then I went back the summer after and I worked for other startups as well, they really allowed me to figure things out. When I went back, I also worked for Palo Alto International Film Festival, and I was basically thrown into figuring out campaigns and social media for the event. And I had never done that before. I found myself negotiating with some publishers to get some advertising space. Never done that before. Jump into it, figure it out, take one thing at a time, and go with the flow, right? So don't be afraid. Failure was amazing. Honestly, I love failure. I think I failed so much at that point, but it was fine because I was still learning. And that really helped progress really my learning. So I would say like, be scrappy and don't be afraid of failure at that stage.
And it sounds like, that's one of the benefits of being in a startup or early stage environment is you take on a role and you kind of just figure it out. And you learn a ton in that process because, you're forced to. How did you go about actually figuring it out, though? I mean, you had to start somewhere. You didn't just kind of blind start executing on it without knowing what you were doing. So what did you do to try to figure out how to figure it out even?
Well, to be honest, there were like things that other people were doing. So go and see what those people are doing, right? So for example, I had to create the website and the blog from scratch. No idea. Right. So I started looking at options that were available. I started looking what other people were using, what feedback they were getting. There's so many networks right now out there that you can read reviews from. So I started going into those networks, started asking people advice as well, who did it before. And then I just went with it. I created it, started seeing how the feedback was. When I started seeing engagement coming through, I was like, okay, seems to be a good platform, so let's go with it. There were other platforms that I started, which afterwards I realized, actually, these we don't really need, so we can scrap it, right? So it's about like trying and then getting rid of if not needed. But I think observing and copying when you get started is such a good way if you don't know how to do things, right?
Totally agreed. I think a lot of people think that they need to be completely original and reinvent the wheel, but there's no real reason to do that, right? Most of the stuff has been done before. In the end of the day, there are certain things that are fundamental to every business, right? You are trying to bring value to customers. That's ultimately what any organization is going to want to do. It depends on what the customers are. It depends on what the value is, but that's what you're trying to do really in any role. And so that makes a lot of sense for me. So moving on through your career, Carlotta, I know that you eventually ended up working for agencies in the UK. And if I'm threading the career correctly, it makes sense, right? You start off in marketing, you parlayed that into agency work, where essentially you work with brands now to do all sorts of things, and then eventually landed at a company that served brands. But can you talk about that work a little bit more? Because I think there's a lot of unknowns for folks in terms of what the actual life is like in working for an agency. For a lot of people, it's actually quite challenging. It's definitely not easy work, but talk about that experience a little bit.
Definitely.
That further prepared you for that opportunity.
Can you hear me okay, by the way? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Sorry, I think there was a little delay, but yeah, if you could talk through that experience a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. So agencies, there is a huge variety of agencies, right? There's creative agencies, there's media agency, public relation agencies. There's an agency pretty much for everything out there. So agencies offer client services that help them with specific needs. So the agencies that I worked at were specifically media agencies. And media agencies offer a huge variety of different services, from social media management. It's usually it's paid advertising generally, right? So you have your social media management, you have your search activity, you have TV, radio, or all the kind of traditional media channels. You have digital, obviously, programmatic advertising. And I was basically sitting in the client services team. So I was working directly with brands and coordinating all the different teams who were running their specialism, right? So I would have the search team reporting into me, the social team reporting into me, and then I would go potentially with them to the client to present the plans, the results, any issues that might have appeared, and any troubleshooting that we were doing. And my first client was actually Oracle. So it was actually great, because coming from an experience of Silicon Valley, I was really able to connect that element to the role. So also, if you go for a job, think how you can connect it to your experiences to date. That to me was perfect, because I was like, hey, I've been in Silicon Valley, I love tech, I want to have Oracle as my client. It just made sense, right? So I did that for a year, and then I moved on to a completely different area. So from B2B, I went to B2C, because I wanted to try B2C before kind of settling onto B2B. So I went to another agencies and I started working on Universal Pictures, which was amazing because I was so excited about entertainment. I wanted to learn about entertainment. And I actually wrote my first dissertation on public relations / marketing for tech and entertainment startups in Silicon Valley. So I was like, I want to do all that tech thing and that entertainment thing before I decide where I want to go. So very different environments, very different needs, deadlines are treated differently, but ultimately what you're doing is similar in terms of servicing the client. And it's not about customer service, right? Customer service is an element of it. It's more about it's broader. It's like customer experience is a strategy for the client. It's working together so we can make sure that the client achieves their goals. And we want to be there every step of the way to highlight any issues or also be proactive with recommendations and new ideas and be innovative. So that's really what you want to do from an agency side of things.
I'm curious because I think a lot of people that start off a career in B2B where they're servicing, let's say, enterprise clients, but then want to go to B2C or vice versa, they find it difficult. So why do you think you were able to get those opportunities and transition to a consumer-focused area?
I think it has a lot to do with passion. If you're able to get your passion across in an interview, especially when you're starting off your career, like there's attitude is so important, right? When you hire somebody at a more junior position, well, attitude is always important, but especially when you don't have as much experience, seeing the passion coming through is so important. So I think that really helped. And then the second thing, I didn't mention it earlier, but as I was transitioning between my Scottish university and my Swedish university, I also did a very short internship in New York with a production company. And I was basically doing some filming, like helping with some filming, some editing and things like that. So I also connected that experience to the role. And again, I'm going back to what I was saying earlier. Any experience that you have that can connect to the role, that is so powerful. Doesn't matter how small. So I think those two things together, the passion and that connection that I made, helped me with the transition from B2B to B2C at that point.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Carlotta, because a lot of people, they think that if I did a side project myself, or I helped a friend with their business, or, what have you, right? It's not necessarily relevant because it wasn't a full-time job, but quite honestly, it is. It might be the most relevant thing that you mentioned during an interview or that you highlight on a resume. And so you're doing yourself a disservice by not connecting the dots for somebody else. It's your story to tell, and you can decide how to position yourself to somebody else. I think that's a really great point. Okay, so then moving on to now what you do at Oracle, which is brand partnerships and working with specific accounts. I want to get into your day-to-day and the like there as well. But to take a step back, can you talk about how it was to get into that opportunity, what the interview process was at Oracle? Did you have some advantage because they were already a client, and is that how you were able to navigate into the role?
So it was not easy. Okay. It was not easy, especially because I was going from a role that was not really technical. Okay. I did have some digital experience, obviously. But the real reason why I did manage to go through, I think, is obviously Oracle, yes, was my client before. So I did have B2B experience that I was able to connect to. It used to be my client. So that obviously helped. The second thing I would say, the digital element, the language, I think. So they were recruiting specifically for somebody who speaks French at that stage, at that point. I hadn't spoken French in a long time at that point, but I was quite fluent in the past. So I was like, okay, I need to pick this back up. So it was a skill that I hadn't used for a while, but I was like, I have nothing to lose, to give it a go and interview for it. So as part of my 5 or 6 interviews to get in, I had to do an interview in French. I was so scared. Because it was very much out of my comfort zone. Even Italian obviously is my first language. I've never really interviewed in Italian because I've always worked abroad and I've always worked in English. So that language element was a huge barrier, not barrier, but like huge challenge. But that went really well. And that got me to the last stage where I met people in person. And I think character was ultimately the personality was ultimately what got me through the line. There's something that I think is worth mentioning at that stage. We were going through my CV with the people who were interviewing me, who are now my colleagues, obviously. And they picked up on the one thing I was hoping they were going to pick up, which is among my skills and interests, don't laugh, but I put squirrel feeding. Okay. So that is an element of personal branding. It's a bit cheeky, it's a bit funny, but it gets people talking. And it's a great way to kind of break the ice and show, okay, this person is not somebody who thinks is, whatever, best person in the world. No, she's down to earth. She's funny. She wants to be like at our same level. And I think any element of personal branding you can add that can get you talking during an interview can really make or break getting into a role. especially at parity of interviewees. If you have like a background that is pretty much similar, who are you going to remember? The one that probably made you smile a bit and that has added the flavor of personality. So that's what got me in. Obviously the experience, but also the personal brand.
It's so true. And people kind of don't prioritize this because you spend so much time. It's natural to spend so much time being worried about making sure you say the right stuff and communicate your value, your skills in the right way. You forget that people are probably reading through hundreds, like this person might have read through hundreds of resumes. They probably have had already dozens of interviews, maybe even just that week. And it's actually better to actually build rapport with them and make them feel good about the interaction. But I'm curious, since you didn't have that technical experience, how did you convince them that you'd be able to do the job?
So at that point, the role itself was not super technical. I actually asked the people who were already doing that job, who I was in touch with before, because I didn't want to get myself into a situation where I wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway, because I'm not a super technical person, right? I do need to be a bit technical to understand certain concepts, obviously, but I knew that it wasn't going to be something undoable. So the interviewers knew it as well. So what they were looking at was more my ability to communicate. That's what was needed. They were like, she can learn the technology, the platforms, they can be learned. Any type of job that has a platform can be learned. So they looked more at my communication skills. They looked more at the examples of me solving problems with clients in the past, some sticky situations, how I would go around certain situations. That was way more important than the actual technical aspect of the platform. Platforms can be learned.
And so can you talk a little bit about then what your job actually means, what you do day to day, and how the skills you developed over the last several years help you be good at that job?
Yeah, definitely. So the job evolved, obviously, throughout the years. Right now, I look after the biggest accounts that we have on one side of the organization. And it's a very strategic role. As you go through your career, especially in client servicing, account management, however you want to call it, you generally start from a very kind of operational role. That's what I did at agency. It was very operational. It was sorting out reports. It was sorting out a lot of numbers, recurring tasks and things like that. As you move up, the role becomes a lot more strategic. It becomes more long-term. So what am I doing on a day-to-day basis is really working with clients, which are brands, to develop a long-term partnership, a long-term strategy, so we can grow together through the products that we service them with. So what I do is putting together a plan, a strategy that allows me to see, okay, which are the priorities for my client this year? I have to make sure that I'm supporting them to achieve those goals, and then translate those KPIs, those goals, into different engagements. So for example, if the client tells me, hey, my top 5 markets that need growing are this, and this. I'll be like, okay, great. I'm going to put together an engagement plan that gives them the tools, the knowledge, the skills to use the product in a way that then, the value comes back to you. And I do that working with associate account managers who are amazing. They help with the, more operational tasks I was saying earlier. So they really ensure the smooth reactive work, because obviously there's questions that the client send in that we have to answer, whilst I focus more on the proactive side of things. I focus more on those conversations that allow me to grow my network within the client organization, that allow me to understand who has an impact on decision making, for example. I want to make sure that I'm speaking with those people. I want to make sure that I understand their needs. There's different needs at all levels. a media manager is going to have different needs than a director or managing director. So my role is to really connect all the dots to ensure that the strategy is coherent and encompasses every level of the organization.
Interesting. If you can speak through a specific scenario, I'm curious, because Kwame dropped into the chat and he asked a question. He said, can you please explain your process when it comes to sourcing and integrating partners? So maybe that's sourcing contact specifically within these brands and what the value exchange looks like. So I think maybe if there's a specific example of like a strategic plan that you help put together and execute to leverage your solution effectively, that could help clear it a little bit.
Yes, let me think of a good example. So basically the question is, how do I translate the service into a value exchange, right?
Yeah. And maybe a specific challenge that you identified, like an example of a challenge you identified with a brand, with a specific contact, and how you helped resolve it.
Right. So there's many examples. I would say probably one of the scenarios I had in the past was to try and find a solution for some targeting options for my client. Targeting means how do we reach our audience for advertising in this context? So one of our solutions was relevant to my client, but they were not super knowledgeable about the product itself, the results that it could have, how they could actually use it on their side instead of us creating things for them. So one of the things that I did was putting together a workshop. Workshops are a really good way, for example, to create a value exchange for clients, because you're getting to meet the whole team who is, part of this close client team. And they get to know the product really well in a fun environment where you're testing things all together, you're testing the technology, you're learning how it works, and then you create these connections at the same time. So workshops, for example, are a really good way to get closer to clients and help them, and them helping us with giving us more contacts in the company. And I would say that's also amazing because I personally love to become friends with my clients. To me, they're not just clients. It's just, it goes beyond. It becomes curiosity, right? I think to be in this role, you have to be curious. You have to want to know a bit more about the people you're working with. It's not just a commercial transaction. There's also a personal transaction to me. So those environments, those situations where you have a workshop and it's more fun and it's relaxed and you're in the same room, generally, really allows you to become friends. And it's a lot easier to work with people who trust you and you trust them. And it's a lot easier to also bring up issues without making it sound, some emails can at times sound a bit tough if you don't know the person, but if you do know them, you just know that there's no malicious, language or intent behind it.
Yeah, I think this is also critical that you mentioned that, because a lot of people will look at a company like Oracle, which is so big, with so many different product lines and titles, or they look at a title like brand partnerships, account lead, and it could be a little bit daunting. But in the end of the day, it's a relationship role. You're building relationships internally. You're trying to solve problems. Money will exchange hands at some point if you're solving some problems for them where they can make an additional investment into, let's say a product at Oracle. But at the end of the day, it's making sure that people like you, and they like you more if you help them solve their problems. And that sounds like that's essentially what you're doing day to day now.
Yes, very much so. And I think it's also worth noting that client servicing is quite different from company to company. At times that means sales as well. For us, yes, we are in the function of sales, but I do work with customer success manager. So they are in charge of the commercial element, ultimately. I am more in charge of keeping things real, okay? Keeping expectations under control, not over promising when we know we can't deliver, but also finding solutions when we know maybe we can't provide exactly what the client is asking, finding a way around it to be like, okay, you ultimately need this thing. We cannot deliver it in this form, but we can deliver it in this form. So it's very much that, it's very much relationship based. And I love the fact that it doesn't really have that sales element. Other people thrive in the sales environment and having the quota, for example, to reach. I personally love not having that bias, I would say. Not the bias, but that element that kind of pushes me to maybe a bit more pushy sometimes.
You know, I think that's actually important to identify. We talk about sales a lot, and it's a critical skill to develop. But there are roles where you're essentially in charge, like Carlotta, of managing an existing relationship, right? Somebody brought in this client, and now you're managing a relationship. You're deepening that relationship, and oftentimes these roles do not have a specific quota that's tied to it, but it's still very client facing. So if you find that you don't like it, that I don't know, that maybe just sales is not for you, there might be sales adjacent roles that would be a good alternative for you. And those oftentimes can be very lucrative as well.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I found, at least early on in my career, I remember looking at account management roles, and it was kind of frustrating because they would require tons of account management experience, even though, let's say, the role maybe seemed kind of junior. Can you talk a little bit about that when you're hiring people for your team? Have you hired people that maybe don't have direct experience in account management? What kind of things do you look for that make people really stand out?
So I would say it really depends on the level you're trying to access. So if account management is something someone is interested in, I think there's very easy ways to get in. I think coming in from a media agency perspective, for example, or creative agency, that might be slightly easier than going directly to a big corporation. Big corporations, I found, they generally want to have at least maybe 1 year of experience or something like that. However, we have hired people straight from uni. And they are generally for the more junior positions, the more operational roles. And that's great because you really need to understand the ropes before you can fully feel confident with managing strategic relationships. So there is the opportunity. And I think, again, I go back to what I said earlier. How you come across is so important. And the role you're going for will probably determine the type of skills you're going to need. So for Oracle specifically, for Oracle Data Cloud specifically, we're divided into an activation side of things and a measurement side of things. I sit in the measurement side of things, which means we measure digital campaigns with our technology. And as you can imagine, it's very analytical. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of numbers. So even if you don't have the experience with client servicing, you're not going to be thrown at the deep end with a huge client to manage all by yourself from scratch. No, you're going to be reporting into somebody who manages that relationship and gives you the opportunity to grow in between. However, what is important is the analytical side of things to get started. And this is a very specific example, but showing that you can think and find trends and tell a story through numbers, for example, that is so important. And that's part of the process, right? We have what we call a homework as part of the interview process. So we do give a bit of a task for people to complete that they take the interview panel through during interview day. And that's a really good opportunity to show through those numbers that we give ahead of time, how you read the numbers, how you find trends, how you find something that is a bit odd and needs a bit more looking into, for example, and how you connect the dots. So that's super important to get started in an analytical type of role. Other roles in account management might not be as analytical and might require more creative thinking, for example. So it really depends what company you're applying for, what role, what clients you would be servicing, and the platform that you would be using.
Got it. Kwame asked a relevant question for those analytical roles, and then we'll move on to Layla's question. For those analytical roles, how important is it to have technical skills, like, for example, knowing SQL?
I don't even know what SQL is. So there you go. Tools, like the more tools you can use, I think the better, right? If you know something, definitely say it during an interview. For this specific role, hard skills that you would need straight away, or that you would need to learn straight away, Excel is going to be your best friend. Excel and PowerPoint for presentations. So you have a combination here of skills that require analytical thinking, but also communication. Communication, I can't stress it enough, is so important. So you have to be, maybe you have to have maybe a bit of a hybrid of a personality and skills. Some people are more analytical than client facing, but then they learn on the way to become a bit more, better communicators. On the other hand, and that's me, I had to learn how to become a bit more analytical with time, whereas I was stronger on the communication side of things. So it really depends how you sell yourself at interview stage. But in terms of hard skills, for my role specifically, I would say Excel and PowerPoint, best friend.
It does really come down to that. Like, I've used SQL before, but I learned it on the job, and that specific job required it because they needed additional help on the engineering side, and somebody had to learn it. And so I met with my VP of product, and I met with a couple of engineers and figured it out. Am I SQL Pro? No. If I had to figure it out again and pull data from a database using SQL, I could definitely do it and highlight it on a resume or through an interview, but absolutely not something that you need formal education on to
no. And you will learn. There's so many tools that we use on a day-to-day basis now for data exports and things like that I didn't even know about before. So that's things you learn when you start. So I would say first focus on what you know, your personality, what you can bring to the tables that is different. The hard skills, the hard tools are secondary, especially when starting off as a junior position.
Yeah, and a lot of people will list like Excel and PowerPoint on their, on their resume, but more important, it's to be able to talk about what did you do with Excel, right? What did you do with PowerPoint? What did it help you accomplish? Yeah. Because then it actually shows you have an ability to leverage that tool to solve a problem, to do a job. Awesome. So Layla had a question. How much do interviewees or interviewers care about what university or major you have graduated from when applying? Do you look at that much?
Look at it, yes. I personally care more about the person that I have in front of me and the vibes I'm getting and the information they're giving me and the examples that they're bringing up. Personally, I only once had somebody who said, "Oh, you've got Lund University on your CV. That's great." That was the only instance. I never had really many people looking at the name of the university, which, it might be a bit annoying if you spent a lot of money for a big education with a big name, but at the same time, it gives opportunities to people who might not even have a full degree to access these opportunities.
That's a good point. And we see more questions coming in, folks. Please do. We have in the last 10 minutes, we want to ask as many questions as you have. I'll add a little bit more context to or a little bit of my opinion to Layla's question, which is when I look at applicants, I will notice if somebody went to a top 10 school, sure. But after that initial noticing it, I really just care about what is it in that person's resume or cover letter that tells me that they'll be able to be productive when they join the team. And if I'm looking at two candidates and one went to Harvard and the other one went to like a small Catholic school in Massachusetts that no one knows about, but that person that went to that small Catholic school actually has done projects that show me she'd be able to execute on the role, I don't even care about what the Harvard person did because what their GPA was or whatever, because it's not really relevant to them being successful or not. So
100%.
It could be helpful, but it's definitely not be all end all. Abdul asked the question, for the presentation process during the interview, what type of question or case scenario would be asked? Let's say for a role like you have, or when you interview folks.
So what scenarios we would be asked?
Yeah, so are there like case studies that sometimes they bring up? Like maybe think about the most difficult thing that may have come up either in your interview or when you interview other people.
Yeah. So one of the probably toughest questions you can be put in front of, this is very specific, right, to this specific product. Things would be very different in other situations, but the platform we have that we use with clients has a lot of metrics. A lot of metrics that tell us, for example, if an ad was in view, how much time people spent looking at an ad, did they reach at least half of the video view, for example. So we have so many metrics, like 60 metrics. And in the homework, there's, I think, maybe 10 or 20, 15, something like that. It's a big table with numbers. So probably the challenging question that you would get is, what can you tell me in relation, if you put in relation item A and item B, which one performed better? If you've never used the platform before and you're not super familiar with the metrics, that can be quite challenging because you have to really go through the definition of the metrics, understanding how they kind of relate with each other, and then make a conscious decision of which one performed better than the other and give an explanation on that. So we want to see the thought process on that decision and how you came to that conclusion, basically.
And is part of that also asking the interviewer questions to get more information, or are they just really looking through your thought process end to end?
I think there's definitely an element of questioning, especially if maybe you're not getting the answer quite right at the beginning. We want to see that you're receptive to maybe the hints that we're giving. So definitely we welcome questions, clarifying questions, just to see, okay, he's getting there, or, she's getting there. Maybe they just needed like a bit of a hint. If we see that then the hint is taken on, that's great. That's really positive.
Got it. That's helpful. I can see how for an entry-level position and entry-level person, the personality is maybe paramount to everything else. But let's say that there was somebody that had 7 years or 10 years of experience working in a completely different industry, and now they want to go and work for you. Do you have any examples of people like that you've ended up hiring that, helped them stand out? Or if you don't have any examples, what would convince you to hire somebody from a completely different background or industry that wanted a career change and now wanted to work for your team at Oracle?
I personally don't see any issue in a career change. If anything, I see that as a great thing, because it means this person has tried different things and they've understood where they can most add value. So I think that would be super welcome. The main challenge is if you don't have any background on this specific part of the ecosystem, there has to be like a bit of a compromise there. You either probably take a bit of a cut to begin with, and rebuild a bit. So maybe jump a couple of years back to build the bricks that you need to get where you have to be. Or you take some time to really learn the gaps, learn, for example, about the industry. If you did, for example, marketing somewhere else, how can you relate the skills that you learned there and fill some of those gaps with transferable skills? And then for everything else, maybe take a course or read about it. I think reading about the industry, if you come from a completely different industry, that's so important, because you need to have at least a bit of context to what you're getting yourself into, and specifying why you have chosen this industry, why you want to make this transition. Articulating that would be paramount, I think.
That's a really great point. I think it's a difficult thing to do, and especially to take a step back. And some people feel like, well, am I like too senior? Are they going to hire me for this role because I'm a little bit too senior? But I think if you can kind of take that head on and just a bit show your curiosity. So like that class example, or your own research or your own project that you did, you're able to now say that, wait a minute, look at what I'm actually trying to do to get into this role, and address it head on. Say that I don't care about taking a couple steps back. This is where I want to be. Look at what I've done to start making progress toward that. I'm not just saying I want to do it. Let me show you how I'm demonstrating that I want to do it. And if you give me a chance, I'm going to prove myself in this role very, very quickly. So there's a way to do it. And I think, really head on addressing it will help you stand out. And it doesn't matter if you don't have that experience, you can make a case for yourself. I agree with that.
Definitely.
I have one more question, Carlotta, here as we get close to wrapping up the session. And folks, by the way, again, as a reminder, this is how we network now. So if this is your first time in an event like this and we're not connected on LinkedIn, go ahead and add us on LinkedIn. Go ahead and add Carlotta on LinkedIn and send a nice message about the fact that you enjoyed this session. And this is an opportunity for you to do that. So I encourage you to do that as well. And by the way, I appreciate everybody that has dropped all their questions in today's session. But my last question for you, Carlotta, is, you've been at Oracle now for, I think, 3.5 years, maybe going on to almost 4 years.
Yeah.
Which is quite some time. I'm curious, now that you're obviously you have experience in marketing and agencies, brand partnerships, B2B, B2C, the story that you have created for yourself can be crafted, I think, in many different ways. So how are you thinking about your next step? And maybe you'll be an Oracle for another 10 years. It's a massive organization. You never know. But I know, for example, that you're also a teacher at university. And so that's clearly something that you've been doing more of and spending time developing that skill set. So talk to me about how you're thinking about your next step. What might be where you go after this?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. I think it's about being intentional now. All these years have really given me the opportunity to experience different things and understand where my strengths are and therefore where I want to develop. So I think my next step is probably going to be investing more and more on the partnership side of things and the experience for clients, really creating an environment that can be inspiring for the people we're working with, whether it's me speaking or if I'm creating something that allows people to inspire clients. To me, it's about like creating that experience and allowing a company to look good. I love that. I absolutely love that aspect. So I will probably invest more and more on customer experience, for example, or partnerships, strategy. Definitely, I love the idea of putting things together so then we can get to an outcome in the end that is like powerful for the clients. So I think that's really the area I'm going to be focusing on. Maybe less so on account specific work, more at a corporate level, like bigger picture type of thing.
I love that. That sounds exciting. And we're looking forward to following your career, Carlotta, and having you back to do another session with us as well. Folks, Kristen on our team just dropped some links for you. One is the link to our program application if you're interested in learning more. And also, if you want to get access to this video recording and this conversation, please do provide your feedback at school16.co/survey and follow us on Instagram at school16co to hear about future events.
But thank you so much, Carlotta, for your openness and for really telling us your story and being honest and open about the reality of the work and how to succeed. I found it super helpful, and it's very clear to me how you got into this role and why they chose you. And hopefully folks here that had a chance to listen and also got a little bit of insight of how a professional builds her career. Thank you so much, Carlotta, and we're excited to see you again soon. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.